Hello, everybody, and welcome to Global Ready Conference. My name is Adrian Cohn, and I'll be your MC today. I'm speaking to you live from New York, my hometown and birthplace. This city has always piqued my curiosity. A Dutch settlement in 1624, located at the southern tip of Manhattan, was christened New Amsterdam. This was the beginning of what would become a global metropolis. Over the past few centuries, people from all over the world have immigrated to New York, making it one of the most culturally diverse locations on the planet. When I walk outside of my door every single day, I hear Spanish. And I don't have to venture too far from home to hear all of the languages of the world. Language is what brought you and me, all of us, together today. And it's so great to be here. We know your time is valuable. We know there are a million other things that you can be doing today, and we do not take this opportunity to be with you for granted. Thank you for being here. Let us know where you're dialing in from in the public chat on the right side of the screen. We'd love to hear from you. Over the past few months, the SmartLink team has been working incredibly hard to create this event that will elevate the profile of our industry. We also believe this is a compelling opportunity for everyone to learn from peers, experts, and thought leaders about how to improve your localization programs so that your brand's content is efficiently translated across devices and platforms. Our speakers today are truly incredible. They have a diverse background and are calling in from around the world to share their stories and insights with you. It includes panel discussions, presentations, and 2 musical performances by the California Honey Drops. The platform we're using today is going to make this event really easy for each of you who are attending. You can navigate Goldcast, this platform, in a very seamless way. When a session is over, it will simply push you to the next session, and you also have the opportunity to move yourself around the event as you see fit. I'm sure you've seen by now that on the right side of your screen, you can have a chat with every single person in a public forum on the right side. And if you click messages, you can actually find other people who are attending the event and have one-to-one messaging or video chats throughout the day. You can also ask questions of each of our speakers. They're going to be here throughout the day, and we welcome you to ask questions throughout. Now, we're going to do our best to answer every single one of them during the event, but if we can't get to your questions during this format, we will find a way to keep the conversation going after the event is over. So fire away. We look forward to seeing and hearing your questions. You will also see on the navigation at the top of your screen a few buttons. One of them is the agenda, where you can see what time certain events are starting, and you can easily join those sessions. You can also go to the networking rooms, where we've set up a variety of rooms where you can go and network with peers. At 12:45, we have a 15-minute networking break, and we encourage you to jump into a room. But if you're not interested in networking through that format today, no worries. Click the Explore button. We have a number of videos that you can discover in this section, including one of my dog Fitz, who just loves to get picked up from the groomer. Today is about enabling you to develop and grow in your role at your company and in your career. To get us kicked off, I'd love to introduce you to our first keynote speaker, Minette Norman. A few months ago, I was introduced to Minette, and I immediately felt connected to her and the story you're going to hear about her career today. In fact, I felt so connected with Minette that just a few weeks ago, when I was asked to personify SmartLink, Minette Norman is the first person who came to mind, and you can see her now. She is incredibly cool, kind, intelligent, and strategic. That's why I couldn't be more excited to have Minette as our keynote speaker today at Global Ready Conference. Please join me in welcoming Minette. Good morning to you, Minette. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And it seems like everybody else is also really excited to have you here. We wish you a good presentation. I'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you. Well, hello to everyone around the world. It's really exciting to be kicking off this conference. It's my first time attending. And what I'm going to do is that I have to tell you a little bit about my career. Because first of all, Adrian asked me, but second of all, it's because I had a completely unexpected, unplanned career that has been quite amazing to me. And because I ended up in localization for a really critical part of that time, I want to tell you an abbreviated version of my professional history. And then I'm going to tell you really how I learned the things that I learned along the way and what the biggest lessons were that I learned that I want to share with you because I think they're useful to everyone. And so let me start by telling you the plan I had when I finished university with a double major in drama in French. So I aspired very seriously to be a successful stage actor in New York City and thought maybe I'll do film someday, but I'm going to start out on the stage here in New York. But the problem was that I absolutely hated going to auditions and I hated rejection, which happens all the time as an actor. So I thought, well, if I'm not going to use my drama degree, then maybe I can use my French language skills. I had studied French, I had lived in France, I was fluent in French. So I thought maybe I can get a job using my French skills. And I did. I got a job at the French Trade Commission in New York City, right in the mid-'80s. And it was when they were transitioning from having a typewriter on the desk to having an IBM PC on the desk. And so this is me in my 1980s hair with one of the first generation IBM PCs sitting behind me. And although I never set foot in the computer lab when I was at university, I took to the computer pretty quickly and I found out what I could do with the very primitive DOS-based applications that were on that computer. I digitized the library card catalog, which some of you will not know what it is, but it was a hard copy catalog of everything in the library, and I got it into a database on that computer. And what I found out was that I was good at figuring out the software, but I was even better at explaining it to the people in the office who were kind of scared of technology. And that skill, the being able to explain software, taking complex things and making them simple, is what led me into my career in tech. Because I had a conversation with a friend who said, you know, Minette, you would be good as a technical writer. And so what I did was I decided to move back to California where I'd grown up, and I moved to San Francisco. This is now the late 80s. And I got my first job in the software industry at Adobe. And it was at a time when they were developing version 1.0 of Photoshop. And my first job was to write the Photoshop version 1.0 tutorial. And that was the beginning of a 30-year career in the software industry. So I started in 1989. And over those next 10 years, I worked at a number of different Silicon Valley companies as a writer. And finally, 10 years from that start at Adobe, 10 years later, I ended up at Autodesk in 1999. And I started there as a writer. And I thought, well, I'll spend a couple of years here, just as I had at these other companies. But my manager, fairly soon after I started, told me that she really thought I would be a good manager. And she needed a manager in her team to manage the writers because she had too many direct reports. And so that was where I got my start managing people. And what I learned, even though I hadn't planned to be a people manager, just as I hadn't planned to be in software, I learned that I really loved managing people because, as you all know, people are infinitely complex and they're all different. And what I really enjoyed was getting to know my staff members, realizing what their strengths were and how if each person could really leverage their strengths, we were stronger as a team. And that's what kind of fed me for many years as a manager. I just loved that work. But fast forward, I had been doing technical writing and managing writers for now well more than a decade, and I decided I wanted something new. I wanted to learn something new. I'm kind of restless and I get bored, and so I thought I'm going to try to find out what I can do in the company. I'd like not to have to leave Autodesk. So I started looking around for openings, and that is when I first found a job in the absolutely fascinating and challenging and world-changing field of localization. So my first job in localization was to manage a very small team of engineers who were responsible for our translation management system. We were early adopters of World Server shortly after it had come out. And our volume of translation, we had tens of millions of words going through the system, and it needed an internal team just to keep things going because World Server was new and didn't even know how to handle that kind of volume. So I managed that team, and I learned a ton about engineering. I learned about databases and storage, but I also started to learn about localization. And, I always had this love of language, and I felt like, wow, I've landed in the most fascinating place. And I learned and learned and learned. And I had several years of moving around within localization, doing different jobs. So I managed technical teams. I managed a business team. I learned about budgets for the first time. And I really felt like I got just an amazing education in localization. And then a rare opportunity came along, which is that the person leading the team left the company, and I put my hand up to lead localization, and I ended up getting the job. So it was around 2010, I took over leading the localization team. And how to describe what it was like to suddenly be in charge of that team? When I was talking to friends, this is the image I kept coming back to. I felt like the eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings was fixed on localization, and not in a good way, as you can imagine, because the senior staff, the executive staff at the time, didn't understand how we were spending the millions of dollars we were spending on localization, or why we had such a large team. And they thought maybe we could just outsource the whole department. I'm sure there's a vendor who could take that over. And of course, there were vendors very willing to do that. And that's where I found myself leading this team. And my job was to figure out, can we save this department? And can we prove that localization has a strategic value to the company? And so the next few years were times of huge change. And I, as the leader of that department, had to make big decisions that many were uncomfortable, such as reducing staff. But I also knew it was about either reducing all the staff or reducing some of the staff. And it turned out it was much more than just cutting costs, that what we needed to do. It was about finding a way for our department to add unique value to the company. And we could. I had this amazing staff who was so experienced, had decades of localization experience. And some of the best ideas came from just soliciting ideas from my team. And one of them was that, well, we can outsource so much of our work. And we simplified our model of working with vendors and went from 20-something vendors to 4 vendors who could really take on everything for us. But while internally, we focused upstream on working with the development teams to fix problems before they got into local language and fix the English source, both in the software and in the content. We developed machine translation engines that were specific to our content. We automated everything we could. So meanwhile, what I was doing at the time, while my team was figuring out all of this amazing work that was getting done, is that I was communicating what was happening. I had to have regular check-ins with our C staff, let them know how we were spending the money, being completely transparent about our budgets for the first time. That was reassuring to them, giving them choices on how they wanted to invest in local languages. And so that was the start of my really getting to be known in the company, of someone who could communicate and be transparent. And I also shared benchmarking data from other companies because I had this great network of other localization leaders. So I'd be put on the spot by an executive. They would say something like, well, what does X company do? What does Y company do? And I could tell them because I had contacts there. And so our reputation as a localization department went from one that was, seen with skepticism and suspicion, to one that was really a department seen as being known as innovative, sophisticated, efficient, and really industry leading. And that took multiple years and constant communication and, fits and starts of things going well. But generally, we went into a direction of being more efficient and more innovative. And the value was clear to the company and certainly to our engineering teams, to our web and marketing teams. And so I was not getting restless yet, but then I heard about an interesting opportunity. And I thought, maybe I am ready for my next adventure. And the next adventure turned out to be when my manager, who was the head of engineering, said that he was leaving his job to go do something else in the company. And I had been reporting to him for several years. And I thought, well, wonder if I could do that job. I found out that the SVP who was hiring for the position wanted someone who could, quote unquote, transform engineering. And I thought, well, I've just been transforming localization for multiple years. Maybe I could do this. And I knew it was a long shot because I had never been an engineer myself. But I applied for the job and I talked to the SVP who said, I know your work in localization. I know you have done amazing things, but you are not an engineer, and I need to see if you can really get traction with the engineering leaders in the company. So I'm going to give you a 90-day trial in the job. And the short version of the story is that 90 days was my big audition. Even though I hate auditions, I did that 90-day audition. I got the job at the end of the 90 days. And one of the things that I heard from the engineering leaders in the company was that they needed someone who brought a different perspective. And I brought that. They knew my reputation for localization, and they thought maybe I could be the right person to lead engineering. And so here I was, the former actor, former technical writer, former localization leader, suddenly in charge of engineering for a company that had more than 3,000 engineers around the globe. And we had grown as a company through acquisition. We were highly siloed. Every team did their own thing. They picked their own tools. They wrote their own code. Nothing was shared. There was a lot of duplication. And my mandate was to get people on common tools and to get people to start sharing code and collaborating on best practices. And what I learned very quickly was that although we had technical challenges, our bigger challenges were really about human behavior and culture, how we interacted, how we collaborated. And I got myself a big education in human behavior and human interaction, because I realized, how am I going to influence all these people when I don't even understand what's making them tick? And so I did a lot of reading and got quite well educated in psychology and human behavior. I want to share some of the most important things that I learned in that job and over the many years of my career. One of the things that I have learned absolutely firsthand is that teams and organizations thrive when they can leverage diverse ideas and diverse talent. I've also learned that innovation is a group activity. And I've learned that organizations need to be deliberate about creating the culture where teams can be creative, where diverse ideas can come to fruition. And I've also learned that every single person, whether you're an individual contributor, a first-line manager, or a leader in a company, has a role to play in creating those kind of cultures where great ideas can thrive. And so I'm going to share some of my biggest learnings with you in a short period of time here that we have. One of the most powerful and positive interpersonal skills, sounds so simple, but is surprisingly rare. And that is the ability to listen with curiosity and without getting defensive. So when I was trying to drive change in engineering and even in localization, I often heard, oh no, this is the way we do it. We have to keep doing it this way. This is the way it is. And I was trying to learn about, well, how do we get people to collaborate? And I found a book called Radical Collaboration by James Tam. And Tam's whole premise is that the biggest inhibitor to collaboration is our own defensiveness. So I started paying attention to that as I was reading this book and discovered how common it is for me, for everyone around me, to be defending our positions rather than listening to the other person. So instead of listening, we're preparing our response. When we get challenged, we lash back out. We're not actually listening. And it turns out what I learned about the brain is that when we get defensive, our fight or flight response kicks in because we are trying to keep ourselves safe and alive. And a social attack is no different from a physical attack to our brains. And so what we need to be aware of is how we respond to getting defensive. And we can manage that if we're aware of it. And so one of the things that if you read that book and if you just practice this is first pay attention to what happens when you get defensive. I find myself getting, I don't know if I actually am red in the face, but I feel like I'm red in the face and that my heart is beating faster. Some people get really loud and start yelling, and some people go quiet and retreat. But in any case, pay attention to your response. And when that happens, you just take a moment and say, uh-oh, I'm getting defensive here. And then you just pause for a moment. And it can seem like forever, but it's really just one breath. And in that breath, you can get back your higher reasoning, because when you're in fight or flight mode, all you can do is stay alive. You don't have your higher reasoning available to you. When you breathe and get back to yourself, you can now say, okay, I don't have to have a really loud response. I can just ask a curious question here, and we can have a real dialogue, a collaborative dialogue, instead of just having a fight. And this is so important in the workforce, in the workplace, because everyone plays a role in creating an atmosphere where ideas can come forth. But if we're always shooting down other people's ideas, that's not going to happen. I will tell you that managing our defensiveness is a lifelong practice. This I know from my own experience. And yet, what we all need is to create those vibrant and innovative and inclusive organizations where all the voices can be heard, especially the voices that do challenge us and make us see new ways of thinking. And to all of you who are managers or leaders, it is so important that you can respond without defensiveness when you get challenged as a leader, because you're setting the tone for the organization. If you shut someone down who challenges you, they're not likely to speak up again. And so then you're not going to benefit from their unique perspective that you really need, that you obviously want and need because they're in your workforce. But how can you make sure you create the conditions where they can speak up? And so I invite you to practice it. It is something we can practice for the rest of our lives, but it is powerful and can absolutely change your relationships and your dynamics in your workplace. The next skill that I think is often underestimated, and it goes hand in hand with listening, is really exercising our empathy and how essential that is in the workplace. So if you think of empathy as the ability to imagine what it's like to be in someone else's position, to imagine what they're feeling, it's very important because we know in our work, in your work, that no one works alone. You rely on others for their expertise. You work in cross-functional teams. And what happens is that it's very easy to blame other people when things go wrong. It's all too easy to do that. And yet, if you can start to use your empathy to imagine what the other person or the other team is dealing with, you can really start to leverage the other people's expertise, and you can solve problems together, but only if you have some empathy for them. So one thing about empathy that I think is often misunderstood, it is not something soft or weak if you are empathetic. In fact, it's a critical business skill. And it also doesn't mean that if you're empathetic, that you agree with everything the other person believes or says. In fact, not at all, but the empathetic awareness of others helps foster an environment where everyone can do their best work together. And some people are more empathetic than others, but all of us have the capacity to improve and train our empathy. And one of the best ways to do that is to spend time with people who are the least like you, who come from different backgrounds, and get to know them. You all in this field know how important it is to get to know other cultures. That increases your empathy. I believe, I haven't read anything about this. I believe speaking another language increases your empathy, living sort of in someone else's world for a little bit. When you ask questions with genuine curiosity and listen with your undivided attention, that increases empathy. So part of the problem is that we're drawn to people like us, but the people who will help us grow our empathy are the people who are the least like us. And they may be the ones who irritate you. So if you think about the people you work with that you maybe don't get along with, or who irritate you on a daily basis, those are the people who can actually help you improve your empathy. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. I had a colleague I truly didn't get along with and had very little empathy for. And then one day he approached me and he said that, something I was doing was actually making him feel embarrassed in public. And I suddenly had this eye-opening moment where I realized, oh, he cares about his professional reputation just as I do. And even if I wasn't going to be friends with him, I could have empathy for him. And so what I advise, and this is something that I practice too, is that when you're having trouble having empathy for someone, maybe because they're difficult to get along with, just look for any piece of common ground, because there's always common ground. Even if we start with at the highest level, we are both human beings. And then maybe you can think of the next thing. We're both human beings and we care about our friends and families. And we care about our professional reputations. Whatever it is, there's always common ground. And it can be really powerful in changing dynamics in a positive way for you and others in the workplace. So as you are practicing your deep listening skills and your empathy skills, what you are starting to practice with those as the foundation is that you're really starting to practice one of the most important skills of all, which is to be inclusive. And I'm sure that all of you at some point have experienced an environment where you didn't feel that you belonged. And I know I frequently felt like an outsider throughout my career, whether as the only woman in the room with a bunch of men or as the only liberal artist with a group of engineers. And it turns out that the need for inclusion and belonging is hardwired into our human brains. We have survived as a species as social animals. And when we are excluded, when we don't feel that we belong, when we feel that we are cast out, our brain actually registers pain. So to our brain, social pain and physical pain are exactly the same thing. So the goal of every organization should be that you make sure everyone feels included. You do not want that your employees to be feeling emotional, social pain. So you want them to feel they're valued, they're respected, they're accepted, and that they are able to fully participate in the organization. And so how do you start making your team more inclusive? Well, I always say to anyone I'm speaking to, start with yourself, start with your own behavior. And so that listening and that practicing your empathy, those are the foundation for inclusivity. And then one of the next places you can start is to start practicing being more inclusive in your meetings, because everyone is spending most of their day in meetings today. It doesn't matter if it's online or if it's in person. Meetings can be a microcosm of your corporate culture. So in your next meeting, I want you to pay attention to who is interrupting others and who is getting interrupted. And give you one clue that you might want to look for. Research across multiple industries, multiple countries has shown that women are interrupted 3 times more frequently than men. So that's a fact, that's something to look out for, but everyone gets interrupted. And what you can do about that is you can interrupt an interruption. So if I'm in a meeting here with Adrian and someone cuts off Adrian when he's in the middle of saying something, what I can do is I can be an ally and I can say, hold on, Adrian didn't get to finish his sentence and I'd like to hear what he has to say. And really make an expectation that we're not going to interrupt each other. And why that's so important is that when you get interrupted, and again, reflect about times you've been interrupted, you feel that your voice doesn't matter, you feel that you're not respected, you're not being heard, and that is going to keep you often from speaking up again. And we do need all the voices to be heard. The other thing you can do in meetings is pay attention to who's speaking. Is it just a couple of people, one or two people who do all the talking while others remain silent? So you can find ways to amplify the quiet voices and do that. Bring out the quiet voices, whether it's through facilitation, by doing post-its. There are many ways you can get all the ideas on the table. But perhaps the most important thing that you can do is to make an environment, create an environment where everyone can speak up and take risks and make mistakes and learn from them without fear of being embarrassed or excluded. That is what makes the foundation of a healthy, innovative organization that continuously learns and improves. So that is a really quick overview of some of the most important things that I've learned. And I want to wrap up with an invitation to every one of you around the globe. And that is to join me in making positive change in our work culture, our working environments, wherever you are and whatever field you're in. Listen with curiosity, especially to those people who come from different backgrounds and with whom you might not agree. And keep developing and exercising your empathy, remembering that we are all human. And be the inclusive human that everyone dreams of working with and that every organization around the globe needs. Thank you.
Wow, Minette, that was great. Thank you, Minette. Are you still there?
I am. Here I am.
There you go. That was a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much. I personally feel like I've already learned a lot from this event, and we're seeing so many great comments in the session chat. So thank you for that, Minette. We've got a few questions that we've been pulling in from our customers over the past few weeks, and we also have a number of questions that have been asked live during the presentation. So we've got about 10 or 12 minutes. I'd love to get in a little Q&A with you.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So first question, Minette, in your long career in the software industry, what did you feel were some of the biggest challenges you faced, particularly coming from non-engineering background, if you're coming from a non-engineering background? On the flip side, did your unique background give you any advantages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the most common thing that I got throughout my career was, you're not technical. You know, that's a challenge. And the funny thing is, when you spend 30 years in the tech industry and, you know, you do technical writing for 10 years, you get to be pretty technical. You don't have to write code to be technical. And so I had to really combat that a lot. You know, at various points in my career, and certainly getting that job in engineering was, you know, I had to overcome the hurdle of not being an engineer. But honestly, I think that my background provided great advantages throughout that career. And one of the things that I think having a liberal arts background does is that it gives you big picture thinking. That's sort of what we're trained to do as liberal artists. And so that helped me in every single one of my jobs. I also felt like I was good at connecting with people, which is so important in any job. And you know, speaking another language, I mentioned it in my talk, I actually think that having more than one language is an advantage in many ways. It just makes you think differently and be empathetic to others. And so I felt like there were more advantages than disadvantages to having a drama and French degree. I think that one of the things I've said is that it's actually the perfect major for a career in tech, because one of the things you learn in theater is how to work with others and how important others are to your success. So if you're an actor, you're nothing without the set designer and the lights and everything else. And so really collaborative behavior comes from, I learned in theater, and I have always been collaborative throughout my career. And I think that's helped me in many ways.
Collaboration, I think it is like a core tenet of one's ability to be successful in the workplace. And you spoke a lot about that in your presentation. And we got a question from the audience that I'd like to share with you now, because I think it ties in nicely with that topic. Do you have any practical tips on how you can gain trust from engineering teams when you are not from an engineering background?
Well, one of the things that I found really important is that I had to learn enough about the world of software development and technology to be credible. And so I think it really does behoove yourself to learn as much as you can without being the one writing the code, and asking good questions. So try to get as much education as you can on your own before you're going to talk to the engineers, and then ask questions and ask follow-up questions. When I was a technical writer, I had to go and spend so much time with the engineers to understand things, because I couldn't explain it if I didn't understand it. And sometimes I thought they're gonna lose their patience with me. But I think if you come from the perspective as you need to fully understand this, and if it's too confusing, no one else is going to understand it either. So helping engineers simplify their message actually made them respect me, I think, in that I would say, I need to explain this clearly. So we need to get it into layperson's terms. And that was maybe something they weren't as good at as I was. So what I would advise you is bring your strengths to the conversations with the engineers, whatever those may be. They'll be different for different people. But asking good questions, asking good follow-up questions, and sharing what you're good at, that can be a good give and take with the engineer. So I felt like it always took a little bit of establishing rapport, trust, that they knew I wasn't wasting their time. But it was well worth doing, and I feel like I had great relationships with engineers over the years.
Yeah, one thing that resonates with me of what you've just shared, Minette, is that I've long held the belief that every single person has talent and has areas of expertise that maybe they're not even using every day because they believe it might be more personal than business oriented. But I actually see a lot of opportunity for people bringing more of themselves to the workplace so that they deliver like a really authentic sort of experience when they're communicating with people. And you made me think of that belief that I've held.
I think it's really powerful. I remember my first management job when I was managing tech writers. I learned kind of the hard way by I put this one guy into a leadership position, and he was the last person who wanted to be a leader. He was an introvert, but he was incredibly talented in visual design. And when I discovered that, I suddenly realized, oh, we need him to be doing all of our graphic stuff. But I learned the hard way. I put him in the wrong job, and then when I found out what his strengths were, could adjust. So I think that's really powerful for each of us to recognize what we're good at and leverage that.
One thing I'll share, and then I'll ask one other question, Minette, is if you all go during a break to the Explore section of this event, you're going to see that one of SmartLing's full stack engineers named Constantine is a brilliant photographer. And the collection of photographs that we've compiled of his to share with you today is something that I just never knew he knew he was able to do. And I'm just so excited to share that with everybody. I think it will make it'll make his day that we've put this together, but also it's a strength that I believe makes our company even stronger. So Minette, okay, another question from the audience. When you took the VP of Engineering practice role, you were given the directive to transform engineering. How did you start? How did you measure success?
Mm-hmm. So really one of the first things I did was to communicate the intention that we had to collaborate and break down silos. I mean, I remember getting up at our big engineering conference and putting up a slide that had silos with an X through it. Like, this is what we're going to do. And the first thing we had to do was to get on a common set of tools. And we decided to put all of our source code into GitHub. And it was a huge multi-year undertaking for a company like Autodesk that had these, 30-year-old software repositories for AutoCAD. But we did it over the years. And really what I was looking for were signs that people were starting to collaborate. And so we would measure like who's actually contributing to other people's repositories, who are submitting joint proposals to speak together from different groups. And really trying to measure collaboration is hard, but we gradually saw things change over the years. And, I did that job for almost 5 years, and the work is not done. I left in 2019. I know they're still working on a lot of these things, but we made progress. And, just declaring the intent to do this and then start with the early adopters and then make gradual progress, that's all you can do. And then communicate the successes. I always talk about communication because the work can be done and no one knows about it. And so as we started to get traction, I would actually really publicly with the executives say, okay, these are the teams. I would put up a chart. These are the teams that have now moved to GitHub. What about the rest of you? And it started to be embarrassing for teams who were not getting with the program. So that's one way of motivating, is just communicate the progress.
Awesome. I love that. We have another question from the audience that's been upvoted by everybody who's watching. So we're gonna take this audience question. It's from Kay Hu, and the question is, thank you for sharing your experience. I've got 2 questions. How do you educate other teams about localization, and how can we break silos in the company so that localization is involved earlier in the process?
Well, I think we need a whole hour to talk about how to educate a company on localization. There's so much there. There's absolutely so much there. I think it really helps to get the executives a basic education in what you do and what you don't do and what your vendors do. Because I mean, for me, it was so important that they bought into what we were doing and they understood the value. And, there's tons of material about what you can share. But the breaking down the silos and working upstream, I think there's so much opportunity to work with engineering teams. And that's what we were really successful in doing. Embedding an internationalization engineer in a software development team is a powerful way to establish allyship. So, for example, we acquired a company that had totally hard-coded strings, and we had to completely redo their code. We embedded one of our engineers in the engineering team, and those people suddenly had a new appreciation for what it was that localization does. So I think those relationships with the dev teams are among the most important to cultivate. And again, bring your strength and show how you can help them. And sometimes they're a little worried about letting you into their source code, but once you establish that you know what you're doing and that you can help, this also is on the content side, not just code, that you can really help them, then you can establish collaborative relationships where you break down those walls. And we really saw that work in my team.
Wonderful. And Minette, in 1 minute or less, what advice would you give to people who want to get into leadership roles and be successful in them?
Okay, in 1 minute or less, I'd say the first thing is make sure that you really like working with people, because that is absolutely critical. Some people go into leadership thinking that that's the next obvious thing, but they don't actually like the complexity of human beings. So you have to like that, first of all. And then look around for leaders that you respect, see what behaviors you want to emulate. And I would say you will also learn really quickly what behaviors you do not want to replicate and emulate. And that is a really great way of learning too, how you form your own style of leadership. There's tons of reading to do. I think it's really important for today's leaders to get an education in diversity and equity and inclusion to create inclusive cultures. So get an education, get a mentor if you can, and then make it clear that you want to be a leader and get those opportunities.
Minette, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I already feel like I've learned a lot, and we've just got started today with the Global Ready Conference. If you would like to connect with Minette, you can find her in the messages tab. You can also find her online. If you go to the docs section in the top right corner of your screen, you'll actually see a link to her website. So thank you so much for being here, Minette.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks for having me. See you later. Bye.
In just a moment, all of you will be whisked away into our next session, A New Era. A New Era is SmartLink's keynote, and you're not going to want to miss the announcements that we have in store for you today. Keep the chatter going. It looks great. Before we jump into the next room, I want to ask you to think about something. Could we live in a world without words? I'll see you in the next session.